Oh, hello everyone. It's time for the third lecture in the Introduction to Wiccan Polytheology course, lecture series. Today's going to talk about ritual, the liturgical year, and issues involved in translating ecstatic experiences into ritual that will be available to people who are not mystics. Given that Wicca started as a mystical secret society of people, all of whom were priestesses or priests, it's an ongoing issue as we move more towards becoming a church movement with a focus on service to a larger community. So, to begin with, the 8 Sabbats and 13 moons and 365 days in the ritual year. The Wiccan ritual calendar is a more or less awkward amalgam of 3 different ritual cycles. So this has resulted in an array of rituals and images in a liturgical year. These include seasonal, solar, lunar, and daily cycles. Now, there have been attempts to unify the seasonal and solar cycles, notably by Janet and Stewart Farrar in 8 Sabbats for Witches, but like other attempts to amalgamate quite different mythologies with different frames of reference and pantheons into one grand system based on the hypothetical triple goddess and double god images supposedly of Celtic Europe, these are not wholly successful. I'll look at the important ideas and practices associated with each Sabbat and how the 4 cycles of the seasons, the sun, the moon, and the days might fit together ritually. Of course, I'm committed to polytheism, and I don't assume that Wicca must have a single coherent system of rituals and cycles, but these are the most commonly encountered ritual occasions that you'll run across. So we'll begin with the great Sabbats of the seasonal cycle. And we'll see that this cycle is that of experience changes in the seasons, and it reflects the way of life of an early agricultural society. This cycle fits the fertility religion aspect of the craft quite well, and it has well-developed double god ideas with good development of ideas of all of the 3 aspects of the triple goddess. Beltane, the May Day fertility festival, is the beginning of the light half of the year, and it celebrates the return of life to the earth. The maiden aspect of the goddess and her consort, the young green god of the grain, mate and bring life back to the land. Everything starts suddenly growing like crazy, birds are building nests, and the hens start laying again. In Edmonton, this seasonal transformation usually happens later in May. Lunasa Lammas, on August 1st, is the festival of the first fruits of the harvest. The garden is productive, the first beer is brewed from the first grain, hay is taken off for the first time, and it's the hottest part of the summer. There's several ritual markers of this festival. It marks the green god's sacrifice of himself in the grain so that we might eat, or the grain mother's self-sacrifice alternatively. In an experiential sense, it makes more sense to see the green god, now a mature man, ruling over the harvest with the queen in her mother aspect. The goddess has grown up over the summer to become the harvest queen. Samhain, or Halloween, is the final harvest. This is when the apples come in, and the animals who can't be fed over the winter are slaughtered. The winter wood is in, and the nuts ripen. It's the time of death, the beginning of the rule of the crone goddess of death and rebirth, and her consort, the horned god of the hunt, the lord of the dead, who kills to feed life. The ritual associations of this Sabbat are with divination, communion with the dead, games of chance, and it's a much more inward turn, the beginning of the dark half of the year. Candlemas is the festival of Breed, the goddess of fire and smithcraft for the Irish, and happens at the deepest and coldest time of the winter. It's the first flickering of heat and light in the winter, and it's celebrated with bonfires and feasting. The whole seasonal cycle can correspond to a single day, ruled by the maiden in the morning, the mother for the bulk of the day, and the crone while we sleep. The solar Sabbats are lesser Sabbats, and they derive from more urban conceptions than the seasonal ones. They're a sky god associated principally with only tenuous goddess associations and have more in common with astrology than with the experiential and seasonal festivals and rituals. They also tend strongly towards the transcendental and monotheistic. High sun, midsummer, on June 22nd, is the time when the sun god is at his strongest, the longest day of the year. And these ritual associations are with outwardness and achievement. The fall equinox, September 21st, is celebrated, if at all, as a harvest festival. Low sun, Yule, on December 22nd, marks the death and rebirth of the sun, and both echoes some of the themes of Samhain and foreshadows the themes of Candlemas. The spring solstice is also a poorly worked out Sabbat, which exists principally for the sake of mathematics, rather than experientially, at least in this climate. The solar cycle, which has all male associations and celebrates the traditionally masculine qualities of outwardness, achievement, clarity, and action, corresponds closely to the lunar cycle, which has all female associations and celebrates the traditionally feminine qualities of inwardness, mystery, contemplation, and complexity. The full moon is associated with the mother aspect of the goddess, with fertility of the body and mind, growth and harvest. The new moon is associated with the crone goddess, with mystery, dream, death, and with divination. The new moon, as it begins to wax, is associated with beginning projects, planting seeds, and with the maiden. Excuse me. Neither the waning nor waxing quarter moons have strong ritual associations. They're weakly associated with the crone and maiden, respectively. Now, there are many potential ritual occasions. The days associated with our matron or patron goddesses and gods, the anniversaries of particular events, the foundings of our covens, and so on, that we might choose to address in the liturgical year. We aren't limited to the dates, myths, or topics that we now principally work with, and I've just briefly outlined them, largely so that you'll understand what people are talking about when they talk about these particular religious occasions. Now, translating world, from ecstatic experience to group ritual. People do religion. We don't principally think it. But not all religious experiences are shared by everyone. Some experiences that only a minority of people have, like ecstatic trance experience, mystery experience, they deepen religion, and they provide significant insight into the realities behind appearances. An ongoing issue for religious bodies and communities is the translation of the ecstatic experiences of spiritual athletes into ritual forms that express something of this fire and can provide spirit opening and meaningful experiences for the uninitiated masses. We need to begin with some idea of the mystical and of ritual, their purposes and meanings in the lives of individuals and cultures. Ritual is a fuzzy concept which doesn't point towards a single identifiable thing. Quote, theoretical discourse about ritual is organized as a coherent whole by virtue of a logic based on the opposition of thought and action, as Catherine Bell puts it. This is an opposition that it's increasingly difficult to defend as we deal with persons constituted in and through our relationships and creating our thoughts as we act upon them as much more fluid rather than discrete atoms. In the same token, ritual activities need to be seen less as exceptional acts performed by exceptional people and be restored to the context of social activity in general, as a kind of praxis, a kind of human work. Now, rather than deal with the product as the starting point, the ritual, it's much more useful to examine ritualization as a strategy for making meaning through actions. Ritualization is a way of acting, a way of effectively structuring and nuancing an environment through a series of privileged oppositions and associations, a set of skills in recognizing and making things meaningful. It is a training and disciplining of social agents into a set of interpretive strategies that afford perceptions and experiences of a redemptive order, which aligns one within a series of relationships linked to the ultimate sources of power. Again, Catherine Bell from Ritual Theory. Ritualization extracts or makes meaning out of symbolic action, and it puts participants in tune with what are conceived of as the broadest and most general meanings of the universe through ritual. The process, regardless of a given ritual script or performance, is more or less effective in creating meaning and embodying insights in the experiences of the participants in ritual. Ritual is a key mechanism for the creation of social capital and the habitus through which it's generated and renewed. It's history turned into nature and the production of practice through which the social world and the relationships of power within it are maintained. Quoting Bourdieu. The mystical experience is an equally fraught and fuzzy category, with many different forms pulled together under a single umbrella. Mystical experiences cross-culturally share a great number of characteristics that are interpreted to fit into a variety of religious frames, often even as they are still in process. It appears that humanity has a predisposition to mystical experience. A list of the described attributes of reality when seen in an ecstatic state or a peak experience, or of the intrinsic qualities of this reality can be made. You can speak of truth, goodness, beauty, wholeness, a transcendence of differences, aliveness, uniqueness, perfection, necessity, completion, justice, order, simplicity, richness, effortlessness, playfulness, self-sufficiency. These characteristics have no dogma or even a single concrete meaning to them, but they're interpretive foundations to systems of meaning. They're also general and broad, and often even seem cliché, apart from the experiences that unfolded and presented them to the people who had those experiences. Abraham Maslow's Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences talks about these experiences in some depth. It's a valuable book. Mystical experience may thus give us a unique access to the ontological dimensions of human experience, but this ontological level cannot help us with our social and ethical tasks. Jeffrey Kripal. So proper ritualization of the mystical is part of preserving the social order, a conservative task. It's in ritual that we can see a fundamental strategy of power. In ritualization, power is not external to the work. It exists insofar as it is constituted within and through the lived body, which is both the body of society and the social body. Ritualization is a strategic play of power, of domination and resistance within the arena of the social body. Again, Catherine Bell. which in part accounts for the rise in many traditions of professional ritual leaders and priests, and the strategic alliances between ritual leaders and the powers that be, together with the marginalization of ecstatics and prophets. We need to put experience in dialogue with tradition, not to quash the moments of grace by explaining them away, being willing to have tradition change to incorporate these new insights. This frequently involves reinterpreting some elements of tradition, which, regardless of the irreducible uniqueness of any given mystical experience, have dealt with this class of experiences repeatedly, to use these channels that are established for the fire. Ritualization is, first and foremost, a strategy for the construction of certain types of power relationships, effective within particular social organizations. Power is not outside of the expressions of it, but essential. It's even constructed through the actions that express it. Ritualization gives its own kind of power through imbuing actions with meaning and by making some statements into performative utterances, and through the sorting of ritual roles and authority. By understanding ritualization, we understand ritual. By understanding the meaning and power of ritual as it is performed and the underlying power structures that are involved in it, we can make it more effective at empowering the people in the ritual to accomplish the goals of their own choosing. There's an act of translation here, a dual act of translation, really. Direct experience is made into meaningful symbolism and then into a, hopefully, moving and effective liturgy that is centered on that symbolism and accessible to the masses. Now, translations are never exact. Words, actions, experiences have layers of meaning and are deepest in the context in which they were originally generated. So translation is an analogy by saying this word is like that word, or metaphor, as for example, to say that the companionship of a god is like being with someone who walks in a garden with you in the early evening. So to say that moving from the meaning embedded in the ecstatic experience to the meaning expressed through whatever medium, even techniques for inducing similar ecstatic experiences, is translation, means that something is lost and something is gained. Every act of translation is an act of creation as well. The translated experience, the written work, the transcribed music, is not the original, but a new thing inspired by the original. So we begin with the understanding that the mystery is resistant to codification or to transmission, direct transmission, one person to another. It's ineffable. Some portion of it is beyond translation. Remember also that every act of translation carries power relationships inside it. The power to translate and to decide what is the truest form of that translation, who is permitted to speak it, to determine the language or the other forms of expression. And translated works and experiences are hybrid. They carry traces of all of the bodies through which they have passed. Translation further, as creation, as a hybrid, transforms the elements that it is translating experience into, as well as changing the originating experience to fit, so that the tradition incorporating the new thing is also changed. However, there's something good there, something that is so good that even a fraction of it, that fraction which can be translated, is good. For the sake of the good, the effort needs to be made. Embodied in experience is an element resistant to translation, something destructive to adaptation, which threatens always to be blasphemous, to overwhelm or alienate the subject matter or content of a tradition, a cultural tradition, through that process of translation. Translation is the performative nature of cultural communications. Now, although many people have had mystical experiences, which differ in the intensity and intimacy of the contact, spiritual athletes have profound and ecstatic trance experiences of direct communication with the divine. These experiences, which resemble each other in many details cross-culturally, are modulated by the mystics through the religious and cultural frames that they work through. For example, Christians get Christian visions, Hindus get Hindu visions, and so on. They tell or write their stories. Some of them teach others techniques and mental and spiritual disciplines which they believe led them to the gates of the experience. But the great majority of people are not capable of direct experience of the divine. Although they want the connection on some level, they lack the discipline or the talent. Sometimes these visions are intense and divergent enough from the norm that new religions are founded, which are centered on the person who had the visions, seeing him or her as an avatar or as a uniquely gifted prophet. But in many cases, the visions come to a person who wants to fit them, their insight and power, into an established tradition, and simply to take the fire, the incomprehensible, and translate it into terms that the average person can experience and understand, with a desire to move them towards enlightenment. Now, trivial normative statements like God is love, or formulae like all life is suffering, are verbal and intellectual conscious mind translations of profound concepts that are arrived at through mystical experience. But simply restating these does not provide experiences or move people along towards understanding. A purely verbal understanding of ritual is inadequate by analogy to theater, and I here quote the wonderful Antonin Artaud. It is in the light of magic and sorcery that the mise en scène must be considered, not as the reflection of a written text, but as the burning projection of all the objective consequences of gesture, word, sound, music, and their combinations. Theater grew out of ritual, and the most effective and powerful ritual draws back from the theater in turn. The subjective is always intersubjective as well. Persons are made in relation to other persons, not ex nihilo. So all communication, including internal dialogue, is really a dialogue with another, perhaps an internalized social other. So it's necessary for religious insight to be made public, or at least to be shared among a group of believers, for its effects to be realized. Religious practice happens in places and contexts where the body connects between one person and another, or between a person and the material world around him or her. This interaction is the place where religion takes place, not in separate, bounded minds, quoting Michael Pagus from the collection Religion on the Edge. Ritual, including the ritual creation and use of objects and sacred architecture, is important in situating and contextualizing the retelling and translation of these mystical experiences. The religious self is anchored in surrounding communities, social relations, bodily experiences of pleasure and self-mastery, and attachment to objects and spaces. The presence of others is an important constituent of religious practice, even those practices carried out in silence. It is the communion of believers, the reflexivity one to another, that constitutes and reconstitutes ourselves. We are translating ourselves. We adapt ourselves constantly by reflecting, measuring ourselves against others progressively like ourselves and against the great other. Moments of grace and a sense of vocation or call are also ecstatic personal experiences. The practices of coming to the awareness of the promptings of the divine and discerning them from the daily chatter of our minds are concerns of many religious groups. When you experience the call, regardless of the specifics of the religious framework, The issue of discernment must come in very powerfully. How can I know and test that this prompting is one from a God and not purely personal? John Neafsey concludes that the heart of the matter is finding a way to live in this world in good conscience. He also points to courage in the face of death, the ultimate mystery, and the redemption song at the end. There's a sense of rightness and balance, a constancy and ineffable solidity in the true call. It doesn't come from the shifting winds of your ego. Tanya Luhrmann details the prayer disciplines of a Pentecostal sect, the Vineyard, and how they train themselves to speak to and hear the voice of their God. They have a group of expectations of what the voice of the God sounds like and what the experience of his presence is like, which is derived from their definition of the God. So as the God is loving and parental, non-loving and non-parental voices are defined as not being those of the God. Female voices are defined out, and those statements that are contrary to their scriptures. So they have a form of Ignatian discipline and domesticated mysticism, which screens out potentially antinomian and disturbing elements. But by setting a practice of constant attention to the world and to their own thoughts, listening for the presence of their God, mystical experiences like hearing the voice and directly sensing the presence of the divine is a commonplace, although very valuable, experience in the Vineyard movement. As congregants learn to pray and to practice prayer, they sometimes experience God with their senses. They may feel the touch of his hand or the sound of his voice. They may catch a glimpse of a vision he wants them to see. Important ritual attributes that ease the training in apprehension of the presence of the divine and translation of the mystical are the ideas of luminality and communitas, which are discussed by Victor Turner. The awareness of a ritual space being a space that is not ordinary space, set aside and made sacred, a heterotopia, and a space where the distinction between people is stripped away and we all face the infinite together, also provides openness to receive mystical messages. Now, normalizing and domesticating mysticism. Ritualization of mystical insights is powerful when it makes, either through the slow incremental processes of doctrine or the intense imagistic experiences that are digested in meditation and discernment over many years, the insight appear instinctive or normal to the people who experience the ritual. Ritualization works first in the body, below the level of conscious awareness and discursive engagement, which produces and objectifies experiences of power embodied in the participants. Engagement in an effective ritual has these relationships and experiences created by the participants themselves in a total group experience whose structure and definitions are set by the religion and culture. Our instinctual body awareness responses are intensified and acted upon and through to embed the insights below awareness. That's rather abstract. So think of what happens when you're in a religious ritual and there's a great deal of chanting and singing going on. The entire group of people are participating together in a single expression, and you can feel the common spirit and sensibility emerging as you sing together or chant together, or even better, as you dance together. These experiences embody and embed ideas about the sacred into your physical self, your physical experience. Ritual is a means of performing the way that things ought to be, in constant attention to the way things actually are, in such a way that this ritualized perfection is recalled in the ordinary, uncontrolled course of things. What we create as ritual is authentic if it works, even if it is shaped by our ideological biases, There's a bias that holds that older ways and ideas are more authentic, and claims of great antiquity are often part of the process establishing authenticity. Our creativity and our folklore processes are translating the uncanny and mystical into ritual with no need of a clerical mediator quite regularly. But folk religion is not orthodox and is not part of the canon. Um, Bodies of tradition are tied to practice, however, to religious and ritual practice. And it's the ritual linked tradition and tradition about relationships with the gods and how to establish them, especially the ideas concerning groups and their relationships to the gods, which can hold the fire for the larger community of believers to use. Ritualization cannot turn a group of individuals into a community if they have no other relationships or interests in common. It can, however, take arbitrary or necessary common interests and ground them in an understanding of the hegemonic order. What usually happens is adaptation and variation of themes and the addition of related sources within established bodies of tradition, rather than the creation of brand new ways of doing things. Brand new things are superficial elements of style until groups of people have been able to work with the new body of ideas and deepen it. Religions must effectively pass along the tradition, teach people, make it second nature, especially the non-intuitively obvious ideas and techniques that deepen experience. Popular, charismatic, and talented individuals can have entirely disproportionate influence if their ideas and work are taken up and used by the people in the movement. But it is in dialogue with tradition that deeper roots can grow from the insights of these people. We need our religions to produce answers and practices that help individuals, families, and communities to cope with difficult times, to create meaning in our lives so that we can be more effective in accomplishing our goals. Religion is a project of groups of people. It's not just a matter of individual inspiration. Inspiration is vitally important as energy to create meaning with, but it is not meaningful in itself. The power that is created in ritualization and the experience of ritual, no matter the amount of direction which the religious specialists give it or the overt engagement with the powers that be, is shared power, and it's shaped by those who engage in ritual activity, who consent, and who resist to different extents. The traditional and customary practices are not the property or creation of any individual, even if known individuals originally wrote songs or rituals or made up stories. It's when groups of people take up these things and use them and develop them and elaborate on them that they become meaningful as tradition rather than as art. This is true even in the cases where, as in some indigenous nations, the right to perform ceremonies or sing particular songs are owned by specific families. Now, in conclusion, this topic is too large for a single lecture to do more than point towards key issues and some solutions. The forceful power of a mystic's direct contact with deity needs to be domesticated, translated, and ritualized to fulfill the purposes of that contact. It's not merely for the gratification of the individual mystic, but for the guidance of the entire religious community that the gods wish to make these contacts. Specialists are trained in recognizing possibilities for meaning-making and connection, and in techniques of ritualization. The exegesis of mystical insights through translation into previously established traditional forms is the most typical route. This is fundamentally conservative. It reinforces as best as possible the established power structures and interprets away as much as possible all of the corrosive elements of the mystical vision. In some cases, techniques of mysticism are taught to the masses of the church, as in the Vineyard movement, so that all are given skills and a strongly reinforced interpretive frame with which to place whatever comes to them. In other cases, the intense mystical experience is imparted as an initiation rite or the like, and personal exegesis over many years, reinforced through participation in the rite in other roles, is the means of incorporating these insights into the society as a whole. The translation into ritual of the mystical is intended to normalize what are non-intuitively obvious spiritual insights. Poetry, theater, and the other arts speak to these insights particularly effectively. The artist often stands in this in-between liminal position, neither in the mystical world nor wholly in the mundane world.